The sun was just beginning to rise over the wide, open land. The soft light touched the tall grass, making it shine like gold. It was a quiet morning on the edge of the plains. The air smelled of dust, wildflowers, and horses. A cowboy named Jack Turner was already awake. He lived in a small wooden cabin just beyond the trading town. The cabin was simple. One room, a wooden bed, a chair, and a small stove that kept him warm at night. But to Jack, it was home. Jack was a man who liked quiet mornings. He enjoyed hearing the wind move through the grass and the soft sound of his horse chewing on hay outside. Every morning, he made himself a cup of hot coffee on the stove. He liked to stand by the small window and look out at the land. He often thought about how the land seemed endless, as if it could hold 1,000 stories. Jack had worked as a cowboy for many years. He wasn't rich, but he was strong, steady, and known for keeping to himself. The town near Jack's cabin was small. It had a few wooden buildings, a trading post, a stable, and a saloon where people came to talk and rest after a long day. The people there knew Jack. They would nod at him when he passed, though he wasn't the kind to talk much. Most days he spent his time herding cattle for a nearby ranch. He didn't like trouble. In fact, he had built a quiet life by avoiding it. That morning, Jack saddled his brown horse, Dusty, and began his ride to town. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the air. He rode slowly, enjoying the peace of the early hour. The sound of the horse's hooves on the dirt road made a soft, steady beat. Birds flew low over the fields. Everything seemed calm, just as Jack liked it. As he neared the town, he saw a few men standing near the stable. At first, he thought nothing of it. It was common to see ranch hands there in the morning, preparing for work. But something felt different this time. More people were gathered than usual. Their voices carried across the open space, sharp and restless. Jack slowed his horse, watching closely. His instincts told him something wasn't right. A group of people formed a rough circle. Inside that circle, he saw a young native girl. She looked no older than 16. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders and her hands were tied in front of her with a rope. Her eyes were wide but not full of fear, more like someone who didn't understand why something unfair was happening. Her dress was simple and worn, and she had no shoes on. Dust clung to her feet. Jack's heart tightened a little as he watched. He knew this wasn't something he could ride past. He guided Dusty closer, slowly, not wanting to startle anyone. As he came near, he could hear what the men were saying. They were accusing the girl of taking something from the stable. A small leather pouch, someone claimed. The girl didn't speak much English. She was trying to explain in her language, but most people there didn't understand her. The men's faces were hard and their voices rose louder with every word. Jack dismounted and tied Dusty to the fence. He stepped forward with his usual calmness. He wasn't a man who liked to argue, but he believed in fairness. He stood at the edge of the circle for a moment, watching carefully. One of the men, a big ranch hand named Tom, and pointed at the girl and said loudly, "She took it. We can't let this go." But something didn't feel right to Jack. He knew Tom had a short temper and didn't always think before speaking. He also noticed something else. No one had actually seen her take anything. It was only Tom's word against hers. Jack's eyes moved to the girl. She stood very still, not begging, not fighting, just looking around with calm, steady eyes. That kind of quiet told Jack she wasn't what they thought. "Morning," Jack finally said, stepping into the circle. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make people look at him. Tom frowned. "Jack, this isn't your business," he said, crossing his arms. Jack adjusted his hat and looked at the girl, then at the men. "Maybe not," he said slowly. "But it doesn't look right, does it? Has anyone here seen her take anything?" The men looked at each other. A few shook their heads. One man mumbled, "Tom said he saw her near the stable." "Near the stable," Jack repeated calmly. "That's not the same as stealing." The girl stood quietly, her hands still tied. Jack noticed a small beaded bracelet on her wrist, handmade, colorful. It looked special. He wondered if she had come into town only to trade something or find help. The people around her didn't see her as a person. They only saw someone different. Jack knew this land had been home to her people long before towns like this were built. Tom shifted uneasily. "She doesn't belong here," he muttered. Jack's jaw tightened just slightly. "She's a person," he said firmly, "and she deserves to be treated like one." The crowd fell a little quiet. They weren't used to Jack speaking up like this. He was usually a quiet man, But when he did speak, people listened. He was known to be fair and steady, the kind of man who thought before acting. Jack walked closer to the girl. He saw her flinch slightly, but he kept his hands where she could see them. "Can you understand me?" he asked softly. The girl tilted her head a little, then gave a small nod. Jack smiled faintly, trying to show her she wasn't alone. "Do any of you have proof she took anything?" Jack asked again, turning back to the men. Tom opened his mouth but didn't have an answer. Another man said, "Maybe she didn't, maybe it's just gone." Jack took a slow breath. "Then untie her," he said evenly. "If something is missing, look for it. But don't blame someone just because they're different." The silence stretched. A few of the men began to look uncomfortable. They weren't bad men, just quick to judge. Finally, one of them stepped forward and loosened the rope around the girl's wrists. She let out a slow breath, rubbing her hands gently. Tom still looked angry, but he didn't say anything more. The crowd slowly began to break apart. People returned to their work, some shaking their heads, others just avoiding Jack's eyes. Jack didn't care. He walked to his horse, ready to head home. But as he turned, he saw the girl still standing there. Her eyes were locked on him. She didn't speak, but there was something strong in that look. A kind of promise, or maybe a quiet thank you that didn't need words. Jack touched the brim of his hat lightly, a silent gesture of respect, then climbed onto Dusty. He rode away slowly, the warm sun now high in the sky. The breeze brushed against his face as he left the noise of the town behind. He felt a calm settle over him again, though he knew that standing up for her might bring trouble later. But he didn't regret it. He had done what he believed was right. The plains opened wide again as Dusty carried him home. The world felt peaceful, though a thought stayed with him. The way the girl had looked at him. It was as if something important had passed between them in that quiet moment. Jack didn't know her name or where she came from, but he knew this wasn't the end of the story. Some things had a way of returning to you, like the wind across the open land. When Jack reached his cabin, he tied Dusty to the post and stepped inside. The little room smelled like wood and coffee. He took off his hat, set it on the chair, and sat down by the window again. The land outside stretched far, quiet and golden in the afternoon sun. Jack leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence fill the space. The world was big and full of people who were often quick to judge, but Jack believed that kindness didn't need to be loud. Sometimes it was as simple as stepping forward when no one else would. He didn't know what the future held, but deep inside he had a quiet feeling that the young native girl he had helped would not forget this day. The sun had started to sink lower in the sky, painting the land in soft shades of orange and gold. Jack Turner sat outside his small wooden cabin, resting on an old chair that creaked under his weight. The long day had left his body tired, but his mind was far from quiet. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier in town. The face of the young native girl came back to him again and again, the calm look in her eyes, the way she had stood silently while people spoke around her, and the moment she looked at him after they untied her. Jack wasn't a man who liked to think too much about the past. Usually, once he rode home, he left the day behind. But tonight felt different. Something about that moment had stayed with him. Maybe it was the way everyone had believed the worst so quickly. Maybe it was how alone she had looked. He had seen unfair things before, but this time something inside him wouldn't let it pass. The wind moved gently through the grass outside. A soft sound came from the horses in the small corral nearby. Dusty was there too, quietly eating hay. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked out at the open land. The sun disappeared behind the hills, leaving behind a sky full of soft pink and deep blue. The stars would come out soon. Inside the cabin, the fire in the stove gave a warm, golden glow. Jack went in and poured himself a cup of coffee. It was something he did every evening, a small comfort after a long day. He sat by the window again, staring at the night. But no matter how hard he tried to push the thoughts away, the memory of that moment in town stayed clear. He remembered how quiet the girl had been. She hadn't cried, she hadn't begged. She had simply stood there, her eyes steady as if she knew that speaking wouldn't change anything. He thought about the rope tied around her wrists, about the looks on people's faces, how quickly they had decided what kind of person she was without ever asking her a single question. Jack didn't like judging people, and he didn't like seeing others do it either. He shook his head slowly, trying to let it go, but something deep inside told him that this was not the end of that story. Life on the frontier had its quiet ways of weaving people's paths together, even when they didn't expect it. The night grew deeper. The sound of crickets filled the air, soft and steady. Jack lay down on his bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He turned on his side, then onto his back, staring at the wooden ceiling. He thought about the girl's eyes, how they held something unspoken, something strong. When he finally fell asleep, it was a light sleep. He woke up several times during the night, listening to the wind outside. There was no trouble, no sound except the calm breath of the land. Still, an uneasy feeling stayed with him, though he didn't know why. Morning came slowly. The sky turned pale blue and a soft golden light spread across the plains. Jack rose from bed, stretched, and went outside. The air was cool and smelled fresh, as if the world had been washed clean overnight. He fed Dusty and checked on the few other horses in the corral. Then he went back inside to make coffee. As he stood by the window, sipping from his cup, he saw something move at the edge of the field. At first, he thought it was just the wind brushing through the tall grass. But then the figure became clearer. Someone was walking toward his cabin. Jack set the cup down slowly. His first thought was that maybe it was a neighbor or a ranch hand. But as the figure came closer, his breath caught slightly. It was her, the young native girl. She walked quietly, her steps soft, almost soundless on the earth. She was wearing the same simple dress as yesterday, though it looked a little cleaner now. Her long, dark hair was brushed, falling over her shoulders like a river of black silk. She carried something wrapped in a cloth against her chest. Jack didn't move for a moment. He wasn't sure why she had come. Part of him was surprised. Most people in her situation would have avoided the town and anyone connected to it. But she had come all the way out here. That meant something. He opened the cabin door and stepped outside. The air was cool and still. The girl stopped a few steps away from him. They stood there for a moment, looking at each other. She didn't speak. He didn't either. The wind moved gently through the grass, making a soft rustling sound around them. "Morning," Jack finally said, his voice calm and warm. She gave a small nod. Her eyes were clear and steady, just like yesterday. He didn't want to make her feel unwelcome, so he moved slightly to the side, giving her space to approach if she wished. She walked closer, slowly, carefully. When she stood in front of him, she held out the wrapped cloth with both hands. Jack hesitated. He wasn't sure what to do. She took a small breath, then carefully opened the cloth. Inside was a necklace made of bone and turquoise beads. The beads were smooth, polished by careful hands. It wasn't just a decoration. Jack could tell it was something meaningful, something made with time, care, and heart. She lifted the necklace slightly toward him. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak. "For you," she said softly, her voice a little shaky but clear enough. Jack blinked, taken by surprise. He didn't expect this. "You don't have to," he said gently. "You don't owe me anything." But she shook her head firmly. "Yes," she said slowly, searching for the right words. "You help. I think." There was a quiet strength in her voice. She didn't say many words, but the meaning was strong. Jack felt something stir in his chest, a mix of respect and something he couldn't quite name. He carefully reached out and accepted the necklace. It felt warm from her hands. "Thank you," he said simply. She smiled, just a small smile, but it was real. Jack stepped aside and gestured toward the cabin. "Would you like some water?" he asked. She seemed to understand and nodded. He walked in, filled a tin cup with fresh water, and handed it to her when she came inside. She took it carefully, like someone raised to respect even simple things. She drank slowly, then held the cup close to her chest for a moment. Jack stood near the small table, unsure how to fill the silence. But the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt calm, like the quiet between two people who didn't need many words. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then said, "Ayana." She spoke the name with a gentle rhythm, as if it carried a story behind it. Jack repeated it carefully, trying to say it the way she had. "Ayana." Her eyes softened a little when she heard him say it. Jack told her his name too. "Jack," he said. She nodded, repeating it quietly to herself. "Jack." For a few moments they stood in the small cabin, two people from different worlds sharing the same quiet space. The world outside was big and full of noise, but inside the cabin, everything felt still and calm. Jack placed the necklace gently on the table. "This is beautiful," he said. "I'll keep it safe." Ayanna nodded slowly. "Gift," she said, "for kind heart." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Jack felt something warm settle in his chest. He had helped her without expecting anything, but she had chosen to return, to offer something precious not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The morning light filled the cabin, making the wooden walls glow softly. Ayanna looked around quietly, taking in the small space. It was plain, but to Jack it held years of quiet living. To her it must have felt new and strange, yet safe. Jack didn't ask her too many questions. He could tell she wasn't someone who talked much, and he respected that. Instead, he offered her a place to sit, and they shared a quiet moment together, listening to the wind outside. As the day grew brighter, Ayanna stood up slowly. She looked at Jack and then at the necklace on the table. She touched her hand to her heart, then to the necklace, a simple gesture that spoke louder than words. Jack nodded. "I understand," he said softly. She gave one last small smile, then stepped outside. Jack followed her to the door and watched as she walked across the open field. She didn't rush. Her steps were light and steady, like someone walking with purpose. He stood there for a long time after she disappeared from sight, the morning breeze brushing gently against his face. The necklace lay inside on the table, catching the sunlight. Jack knew something had changed. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this was not the end. Sometimes life brings people together in quiet, unexpected ways. Sometimes one small act of kindness can create a bond that lasts far longer than anyone expects. The days that followed moved slowly, just like most days on the open plains. The air was warm during the day and cool at night, and the soft wind carried the smell of earth, grass, and wildflowers. Jack Turner continued with his daily routine, but something inside him felt different. Every morning he saddled Dusty and rode to the ranch to help with the cattle. He worked with the same quiet strength he always had, moving through the day without complaint. But in the quiet moments, his mind kept returning to the girl named Ayanna. He thought about how she had stood outside his cabin, how calm her eyes had been, and how carefully she had handed him the necklace. It wasn't just a gift, it was something meaningful. The necklace now hung on a small wooden hook by the window. When the sunlight passed through the turquoise beads, it made the cabin feel warm and bright. Jack often caught himself looking at it without meaning to. It reminded him of the moment she had looked at him and said, "For kind heart." Jack had always lived a quiet life. He liked it that way. But now there was something new in that quiet, something soft, almost like a promise he couldn't fully understand yet. One evening, as the sun was setting behind the hills, Jack sat outside his cabin again. The sky was filled with soft colors, pink, gold, and pale orange. He leaned back on his old chair, feeling the wind brush across his face. Dusty was resting in the corral, his tail swishing lazily at the flies. The land stretched out before Jack, wide and endless, just as it always had. But for the first time in a long while, he found himself listening for footsteps. Not the sound of horses or wagons from the town, but quiet footsteps, the kind Ayanna made. He didn't know why he expected her to come again. She had already thanked him. She didn't owe him anything, but something told him that their paths hadn't crossed for no reason. The sun slipped lower, and stars began to show faintly in the darkening sky. Jack finally stood up and went inside. The small cabin was warm, and the necklace by the window caught the soft glow of the stove's fire. Jack poured himself a cup of coffee and sat near the window, his usual place. He tried to focus on the quiet, but his mind was full of thoughts. The next day, Jack went into town to trade for supplies. He didn't go often, but he needed flour, coffee, and a few other things. When he arrived, the town felt a little tense. People were talking in low voices, and when they saw him, some gave him curious looks. Jack didn't need to ask why. He could guess. What happened that day with Ayanna hadn't been forgotten. Some people respected what he did. Others didn't agree. But Jack had never been one to worry about people's gossip. He walked into the trading post, bought what he needed, and left quietly. As he was loading the supplies onto Dusty's saddle, an older man named Samuel walked up to him. Samuel had known Jack for years. He wasn't a close friend, but they respected each other. "You stirred some feelings in town, Jack," Samuel said, leaning against the post with a thoughtful look. Jack tied the last bundle and looked up. Didn't mean to stir anything, he said calmly. Samuel nodded slowly. I know, but standing up for someone people don't understand. It leaves a mark. Some don't like change, even if it's a good one. Jack didn't answer. He just tightened the saddle strap. Samuel gave a small, knowing smile. You did the right thing. Not everyone would have. Jack tipped his hat slightly in thanks. I just did what felt right, he said simply. With that, he climbed onto Dusty and started the ride home. The land looked peaceful, but his heart felt full of quiet thoughts. When Jack reached his cabin, the sun was setting again. The light poured through the windows, soft and golden. He set down the supplies, fed Dusty, and washed his hands at the small water barrel outside. As he turned toward the cabin, something caught his eye. A small shape near the edge of the trees. His heart gave a small jump. He stepped closer, slowly, and saw her, Ayanna. She stood just beyond the fence, half in the light, half in the shadows. She was wearing the same dress, though now she had a small woven bag hanging from her shoulder. Her hair moved gently in the wind. She wasn't in a hurry. She just stood there, waiting for him to see her. Jack walked toward her with steady steps. When he reached the fence, she smiled softly, the kind of smile that didn't need many words. You came back, he said quietly. She nodded. Yes, he didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Her being there felt right, as if the world had brought her back on purpose. She stepped forward and held out something small wrapped in cloth again. This time it wasn't a necklace. When she opened it, Jack saw a piece of carved wood, shaped like a horse, smooth and polished. It was simple but beautiful. She placed it in his hand carefully. Gift, she said again. Jack held the carving gently. Thank you, he said softly. Ayanna's eyes looked at him with quiet trust. You helped me, she said slowly. Now I help. Jack wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't used to someone giving him gifts, especially not gifts made with care. He cleared his throat softly. You already thanked me, he said. She shook her head lightly. Not finished, she said. Jack felt something warm in his chest. Not the kind of warmth from a fire, but something deeper, something human. He stepped aside again, just like the first time, and invited her toward the cabin. She followed quietly, her steps soft on the earth. Inside, the cabin smelled like coffee and wood smoke. Ayanna looked around, her eyes curious but calm. Jack poured her some water again and placed it on the small table. She sat down slowly, her posture graceful, like someone raised to move with quiet dignity. They sat together in silence for a while. Jack wasn't good at talking much, and she didn't seem to need many words either. It was strange, but their silence felt easy. Finally, Jack asked, Do you live far? She tilted her head slightly, thinking of how to explain. Near a river, she said. Walk long, but not far. Jack nodded slowly. He could picture it, a small camp or village by the river. It was a peaceful place, not too far from the town, but far enough to feel like a different world. She touched the necklace hanging on the wall with her eyes, and then looked back at him. You keep? She asked softly. Yes, Jack said with a small smile. I keep. Her eyes brightened a little. For her, the necklace wasn't just a pretty thing. It was a piece of her heart, her people, and her trust. Outside, the last light of day faded. The stars began to appear again, one by one, like tiny lanterns in the night sky. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the wind filled the spaces between their quiet words. Jack realized something as they sat there. He wasn't used to having someone in the cabin with him. For years, it had been just him, the wind, and the horses. But now, with Ayanna sitting across from him, the place didn't feel empty anymore. It felt different. When it grew late, Ayanna stood up. She touched her hand to her chest again, the same gesture as before. Thank you, she said softly. Jack nodded. You're welcome, Ayanna. She walked out into the night, her figure moving softly like a shadow across the land. He stood at the doorway, watching her disappear toward the line of trees. When he went back inside, he placed the carved wooden horse next to the necklace. The two gifts sat side by side on the small shelf, catching the light from the fire. Jack stared at them for a long time. He didn't fully understand why she had chosen to return, but he knew her visits meant something quiet but strong. The wind outside sang through the grass, and the stars looked brighter than usual. Jack lay in bed that night feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. Life had a way of weaving paths together in quiet, unexpected ways. And somehow his path and Ayana's had found each other again. The next morning, the plains were quiet and golden as the sun rose over the horizon. Jack Turner stepped out of his cabin and breathed in the cool, fresh air. The soft wind brushed against his face, carrying the smell of wildflowers and damp earth. Dusty pawed gently at the ground, eager for the morning ride, and Jack smiled softly. Despite the usual rhythm of life on the frontier, the past days had brought a new feeling into Jack's world, a sense that something important was unfolding, something he could not yet name. He fed Dusty and checked the corral, his movements steady and calm. For years he had lived a simple life, following the routines of a cowboy, riding the plains, herding cattle, maintaining his cabin. But since meeting Ayana, everything seemed slightly brighter, slightly more alive. Her presence, even when she wasn't there, left a mark on the quiet spaces of his life. Jack saddled Dusty and rode toward the open plains, as he often did when he needed to think. The rhythm of the horse's hooves on the soft earth was familiar and comforting. The plains stretched endlessly, bathed in morning light with the occasional bird rising from the grass. Jack let his mind wander, remembering the previous encounters with Ayana. Her calmness, her trust, the way she had offered the necklace and then the carved wooden horse. All these things lingered in his thoughts. As he rode, he thought about the small gestures she had made. Each gift had been simple but filled with meaning. It was clear she had chosen carefully, giving from her heart, not from obligation. Jack realized he had never met anyone like her before. Most people were quick to speak, to act, to judge. But Ayana seemed to move with patience and quiet thought, considering every step carefully. After a long ride, Jack returned to the edge of the trees near his cabin. Dusty shook his mane as if brushing off the morning wind. Jack dismounted and leaned against the fence, looking toward the horizon. He didn't have to wait long. There, walking through the soft grass, was Ayana. She had returned again. She carried her small woven bag over her shoulder, and the sunlight caught the edges of her hair, making it glow in the soft morning light. She smiled as she approached, a smile that was gentle but full of life. Jack felt a warmth in his chest he could not explain. "Good morning," Jack said softly. "Good morning," Ayana replied, her voice calm and clear. Jack nodded toward the cabin. "Would you like to come inside?" She nodded and followed him quietly. The cabin had become a small sanctuary, a place where their worlds briefly touched in peace. Jack set down some fresh water and gestured for her to sit. She carefully placed her bag on the floor and lowered herself onto the wooden chair. For a few moments they simply looked at each other, sharing the quiet. It was a silence filled with understanding rather than emptiness. Jack finally spoke. "Did you have a long walk?" Ayana tilted her head slightly. "Not long. Walk easy," she said. Jack smiled. "That's good." He paused, unsure how to continue, then asked gently, "What brings you back today?" Ayana reached into her woven bag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She held it out to him carefully. When Jack opened it, he found a tiny pouch filled with dried herbs. The smell was sweet and earthy. "These," Ayana said softly, "help you. Good for sleep. Good for health." Jack held the pouch in his hands, feeling the weight of her thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Ayana. You are very kind," she smiled again. "You help me. I help you," she said simply. Jack realized that for her, their meetings were not just about gifts or thanks. They were about balance, a quiet exchange of respect and trust. He had acted to protect her, and now she was returning that kindness in her own way. They spent the morning together, talking in simple words, learning about each other in small steps. Jack told her about life on the plains, the routines of the ranch, and the small joys of quiet evenings in his cabin. Ayana spoke of the river near her home, the songs of her people, and the care she took in creating gifts. Although their languages were different and her English was limited, they understood each other. Words were not always needed when trust and respect were present. At one point, Jack noticed her gaze resting on the wooden horse he had received earlier. She nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that it had found a safe place in his cabin. He smiled. "It will stay here," he said. "Safe and always remembered." Ayana's eyes brightened a little, and she gave a small nod of approval. The quiet connection between them felt stronger than ever. Jack realized that even small gestures could carry great meaning. Their friendship, if it could be called that, was built on understanding and simple acts of care. After a while, Ayana reached into her bag again and pulled out a small piece of woven fabric folded neatly. She handed it to Jack. "Make warm," she said. Jack took the fabric and unfolded it. It was soft and colorful, made with care. He could see the effort she had put into it, and he felt grateful. "This is wonderful," he said. "I'll use it well." She smiled, then stood up. Jack felt a small pang of surprise, but he knew she was not someone to overstay. Her visits were deliberate, measured, and full of purpose. "Will you come tomorrow?" Jack asked quietly, hoping she would. Ayana paused, then nodded. "Yes, visit again," she said. Jack felt a small warmth spread through him. Their visits had become something he looked forward to, something that made the quiet life on the plains feel a little fuller. He knew their connection was special, not just because of what they shared, but because of the trust they had built. The rest of the day passed in quiet labor. Jack worked on the cabin, repaired a small fence, and tended to Dusty. Yet even in these tasks, his mind wandered to Ayana. He remembered the way her eyes had looked when she handed him the herbs, the gentle smile she gave when she spoke, and the quiet confidence that seemed to flow from her. Evening came, and Jack prepared a small meal for himself. He ate slowly, thinking about the morning's visit and what it had meant. The wind moved softly through the tall grass outside, and the stars began to appear in the sky. Jack looked at the small shelf where the necklace, the wooden horse, and the woven fabric rested. They were not just objects. They were symbols of trust, kindness, and the bond he had formed with Ayana. As he cleaned up the small table and washed his hands, he thought about the future. He didn't know where her path would lead, and he didn't know what challenges might come. But he did know one thing. She had returned to him not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. That choice, that quiet decision, spoke louder than any words. Night fell completely, and the wind carried the soft sounds of the plains. Jack sat outside again, staring at the stars. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace that was deeper than the quiet he was used to. He realized that life could bring unexpected gifts, not always gold or riches, but trust, friendship, and the quiet knowledge that kindness mattered. He thought of Ayana, walking softly across the grass, bringing small tokens of care. Each visit, each gift had created a bridge between two people from different worlds. Jack understood now that true connection was about more than words or distance. It was about understanding, respect, and the willingness to act with a kind heart. As he finally went to bed that night, Jack felt a deep calm settle over him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew it would be brighter for having met her. The necklace, the wooden horse, and the woven fabric rested in their place, quiet reminders of the bond that was growing stronger each day. And in the silence of the night under the endless sky of the plains, Jack Turner realized that some acts of kindness could change a life in ways that words could never fully capture. The friendship he had begun with Ayana was one of those changes, quiet, gentle, and lasting. The next morning, the plains glowed softly under the rising sun. The tall grass swayed gently in the wind, and the air carried the scent of earth, wildflowers, and dew. Jack Turner stepped out of his cabin, stretching his arms as Dusty nickered softly from the corral. The rhythm of life on the plains was familiar and comforting, but Jack felt a quiet excitement in his chest. Today, he thought, might be another day with Ayana. He fed Dusty, checking his saddle and brushing the horse's mane. Every little task felt calm and purposeful. Even though he had always lived a simple, quiet life, the past few days had added a new layer of warmth to his routine. Each time Ayana had visited, she had brought not only gifts but also a sense of connection, something rare in his world of open fields and endless horizons. As Jack walked to the cabin door, he noticed movement at the edge of the trees. He paused and squinted, and a small smile spread across his face. There she was. Ayana had returned, walking steadily through the grass. She carried her small woven bag over her shoulder, and the sunlight caught the edges of her hair, making it shimmer like strands of dark silk. She paused when she saw him, her eyes brightening with recognition. Jack felt a warmth rise in his chest. "Good morning, Ayana," he said softly. "Good morning," she replied, her voice calm and steady. Jack stepped aside and gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside, please." She nodded and walked in quietly, placing her bag on the floor. Jack filled a tin cup with fresh water and handed it to her. She took it carefully and drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his. For a moment they simply stood there, sharing the quiet comfort of each other's presence. Words were not always necessary between them. Their understanding had grown in those small, simple moments. Finally, Ayanna reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Jack carefully. When he opened it, he saw a beautifully crafted bracelet, woven with colorful threads and tiny beads. Each bead seemed to tell a story, and the care with which it was made was clear. "This is for you," she said softly, her eyes calm but shining with sincerity. Jack held the bracelet in his hands, marveling at the delicate craftsmanship. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you, Ayanna. You didn't have to do this." She shook her head. "I want," she said simply. "For you." "You help me, I think." Jack felt a quiet swell of gratitude. He realized that her gestures were not just about repayment. They were about trust, respect, and the bond they had formed. Each visit, each gift strengthened that connection, bridging the distance between their different worlds. They sat together at the small table, talking in simple words, learning about each other's lives in small steps. Jack told Ayanna about his days on the plains, about tending to the cattle and the quiet pleasures of life in the cabin. She spoke about her home near the river, the songs her people sang, and the careful work she put into creating gifts for those she respected. Their words were simple, but the meaning behind them was deep. As the morning passed, Jack realized that he had grown to look forward to these visits more than he had expected. The quiet cabin, the soft wind, and the gentle presence of Ayanna had brought a sense of peace and joy into his life. He understood now that life's small, meaningful connections could be more valuable than wealth or comfort. At one point, Ayanna reached out and touched the wooden horse he had received on her first visit. Her fingers lingered on it for a moment, as if acknowledging that it had found a safe place in his cabin. Jack smiled. "It will stay here," he said. "Safe and always remembered." Her eyes brightened slightly and she nodded. It was a silent understanding between them, a recognition that the gifts were more than objects. They were symbols of trust, gratitude, and the bond they had formed. Later, Ayanna took out a small piece of paper and drew simple symbols on it. Jack watched curiously. She showed him each mark and with gentle gestures explained what they meant. They were not words, but they carried meaning, stories, feelings, and lessons from her people. Jack studied them carefully, realizing that even though he could not fully understand the language, the messages were clear. Respect, friendship, and kindness mattered above all else. The day passed with quiet conversation, shared work, and moments of stillness. Jack repaired a small section of the cabin fence, and Ayanna helped by holding tools or passing items. They moved together naturally, a rhythm forming between them. Jack felt a sense of companionship he had never known before. Life on the plains had always been solitary, but now, with her presence, it felt fuller and warmer. As the sun began to sink behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jack and Ayanna sat outside the cabin. The soft wind brushed against their faces and the distant sound of birds filled the air. Jack looked at the gifts she had given him, the necklace, the wooden horse, and the woven bracelet, and felt a deep appreciation for the care she had put into each one. "You are very thoughtful, Ayanna," Jack said softly. She smiled, a small, quiet smile. "You help," she replied simply. Jack nodded, feeling a profound sense of connection. He realized that their friendship, built on simple acts of kindness, had grown into something lasting. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was strong and real. As evening fell, Ayanna prepared to leave. She picked up her woven bag and gave Jack one last small smile. "See you tomorrow," she said softly. "I will be here," Jack replied, tipping his hat. She walked across the soft grass, her steps light and steady. Jack watched until she disappeared among the trees, her figure fading into the gentle shadows of night. Inside the cabin, Jack set down the day's gifts and sat by the small stove. The fire cast a warm glow across the room, and he stared at the objects on the shelf. They were more than just gifts. They were reminders of trust, respect, and the quiet bond that had formed between him and Ayanna. That night, as he lay in bed, Jack thought about the journey they had shared. He remembered the first time he had stepped forward to help her, the courage it had taken to stand up for what was right, and the way she had returned to repay his kindness in her own way. Life on the plains was often harsh and unpredictable, but moments like these reminded him of the quiet beauty that could exist in the world. He thought about the future, though he did not know what it would hold. He hoped Ayana would continue to visit, and he felt certain that their friendship would grow stronger with each passing day. The small cabin, the open plains, and the endless sky had become the backdrop for something meaningful, a connection that transcended words and distance. As the stars filled the night sky, Jack closed his eyes with a sense of peace. He knew that life could bring unexpected gifts, not always in the form of wealth or comfort, but through trust, friendship, and quiet acts of kindness. He felt grateful for the young girl who had stepped into his life, and he understood that sometimes the smallest gestures could leave the greatest impact. Morning came once again, and the land glowed with the soft light of dawn. Jack rose from his bed, feeling a quiet anticipation in his chest. He prepared Dusty for a ride, and as he stepped outside, he saw a familiar figure walking toward him. Ayana had returned just as she had promised. Jack smiled, feeling warmth and joy spread through him. Their bond had grown stronger with each visit, and he knew it would continue to grow. Life on the plains would continue its quiet rhythm, but now it was filled with meaning, connection, and hope. In the days and weeks that followed, Jack and Ayana continued their visits. They shared gifts, stories, and quiet moments of companionship. Each day brought new understanding and trust, and their friendship deepened. The small cabin became a place of learning, kindness, and shared experiences, where two lives from different worlds could come together in harmony. Jack realized that the simplest actions often carried the greatest weight. Standing up for what was right, offering kindness without expecting anything in return, and accepting the gifts of others with gratitude could change lives in ways that words could not fully describe. The necklace, the wooden horse, and the woven bracelet remained on the shelf, symbols of a friendship that had been built on trust and care. They were reminders that even in the quietest corners of the world, meaningful connections could grow and flourish. And so, under the wide, endless sky of the plains, Jack Turner and Ayana continued their story, a story of kindness, trust, and friendship that would be remembered not for its grandeur, but for the simple, meaningful moments that had brought them together. The wind moved softly through the grass. The stars shone brightly in the night, and the quiet rhythm of life continued. But within that quiet, Jack felt something extraordinary. A bond that had begun with a small act of courage and had grown into a lasting friendship, full of respect, trust, and the beauty of human connection.